Richard Widmark never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His silence carried more weight than most men's anger. To him, acting wasn't fame or fortune. It was discipline, precision, and truth. But in a Hollywood that worshipped chaos and charisma, that belief made him a relic. Behind the polished smiles and golden lights, Widmark saw something darker, a quiet corruption spreading through the art he loved. He watched legends turn the craft into vanity, watched studios reward arrogance over integrity, and he never forgot their names. Over time, that quiet man built a list, a private reckoning of those he believed had poisoned the soul of cinema. They were not murderers or villains on screen. They were something worse. They made him lose faith in what acting was meant to be. Frank Sinatra, the cold power of indifference. When Richard Widmark first met Frank Sinatra on the set of The Detective, he already knew their worlds would collide. Widmark was a man who rehearsed until every line felt carved in stone. Sinatra, on the other hand, floated through fame like a man who owned time itself. To Widmark, discipline was respect. To Sinatra, control was unnecessary, and that difference was enough to ignite a quiet war. The first day of filming set the tone. Widmark arrived early, script in hand, ready to dissect the scene. Sinatra showed up half an hour late, sunglasses still on, humming one of his own songs. When the assistant director nervously asked if they could begin, Sinatra smirked and said, "When the light thinks I'm ready." The crew laughed, but Widmark's expression didn't change. Behind that calm stare was disgust, not just for Sinatra's arrogance, but for what it symbolized. To him, the golden age of Hollywood was dying, replaced by a culture where stardom mattered more than truth. Sinatra embodied that shift. During rehearsals, Widmark studied emotion like a surgeon. Sinatra skimmed his lines as though reading a menu, saying, "The audience doesn't want the character. They want me." That single sentence burned in Widmark's memory for years. On screen, the difference was invisible. Sinatra's charm was effortless. The camera adored him. His lazy grace, his half-smile, the voice that rolled through every scene, it all worked. But Widmark saw through it. He believed great acting required pain, sweat, and humility. What Sinatra called confidence, Widmark saw as indifference. It was a soft cruelty, the kind that didn't scream or fight, but slowly drained the meaning from everything around it. During one intense sequence, Widmark prepared for over an hour, fully immersed in the scene. Just before the camera rolled, Sinatra turned to him and said, "You done yet? I've got lunch plans." Widmark didn't respond. He delivered the scene perfectly, eyes burning with quiet rage. When the director shouted, "Cut!" Widmark muttered to himself, "Perfect, like a fake kiss." They never worked together again. Years later, when asked about Sinatra, Widmark only said, "He doesn't act. He's just there." It wasn't hatred. It was heartbreak. Sinatra had proven that charm could replace effort, that fame could silence honesty. And for a man who believed acting was sacred, nothing felt more evil than that. Marlon Brando, the chaos disguised as genius. To Richard Widmark, Marlon Brando was both a marvel and a warning, proof that genius could destroy the very craft it claimed to serve. When Brando arrived in Hollywood in the early 1950s, the world called him a revolution. Widmark called him chaos. The two men stood on opposite sides of an artistic war, control versus instinct. For Widmark, acting was a discipline of thought. For Brando, it was a surrender to feeling. Brando was born of the method school, the idea that actors must live the role, breathe it, and bleed for it. Widmark came from the stage, where technique and restraint were sacred. To him, Brando's methods looked like anarchy in slow motion. He would show up late, skip rehearsals, and tape his lines behind props so he wouldn't have to memorize them. Directors called it innovation. Widmark called it disrespect. Once, While visiting a set in the early 1950s, Widmark watched Brando forget his lines during A Streetcar Named Desire. Instead of stopping, Brando shrugged, looked off camera, and improvised. "Forget it. I'll just tell the truth," the crew applauded. Widmark stayed silent. Later, he told a colleague, "Some people need chaos to create. I only need focus." When The Godfather arrived, Brando's quiet menace as Don Corleone stunned the world. Widmark admired the performance but couldn't stomach the process behind it. To him, it wasn't mastery. It was luck born from chaos. Brando refused to learn lines, argued with directors, and treated sets like experiments. Yet somehow, every time, the camera loved him. What disturbed Widmark most wasn't Brando's rebellion, but how it reshaped Hollywood. Suddenly, every young actor wanted to be real like Brando, raw, unpredictable, untamed. They confused disorder with truth. Widmark saw that shift as a betrayal of everything he valued. "He doesn't act with people," Widmark once said. "He acts on them." That single difference, he believed, separated the craftsman from the self-worshipper. To Widmark, Brando's chaos became contagious. The moment when discipline lost to emotion and precision gave way to instinct. He didn't hate Brando for his talent. He hated what the world did with it. Hollywood no longer worshipped storytelling, it worshipped the storm. And in that storm, Richard Widmark felt something precious slipping away, the soul of his art. Kirk Douglas, the man who brought a storm onto the set. If Marlon Brando represented chaos, then Kirk Douglas was pure control, but control that came like a hurricane. Richard Widmark admired strength, but Douglas's energy crossed into obsession. Every movement, every word, every glare from Douglas carried an intensity that burned through the room. To audiences, it looked like power. To Widmark, it looked like domination. Kirk Douglas didn't act. He occupied. His presence filled every frame, swallowing everyone else whole. Widmark believed in balance, that great scenes were built from harmony between actors. Douglas, on the other hand, treated every scene as his battlefield. He charged into lines as though fighting an invisible war, voice raised, veins visible, eyes wide with fury. Widmark once said, "He doesn't share the stage. He conquers it." They never worked together, though they were often considered for the same roles. Studios once suggested pairing them for a Western, but Widmark refused, saying, "There's only room for one storm in a scene, and Kirk brings the whole hurricane." He wasn't joking. Widmark had seen Douglas on set before, pacing, shouting, even correcting co-stars' performances as if he were directing the film himself. In The Bad and the Beautiful, Douglas played a ruthless filmmaker who destroyed everyone in his orbit. Many in Hollywood whispered that he wasn't acting. He was just being himself. Later, in Paths of Glory, his performance as Colonel Dax, heroic, fiery, and relentless, cemented his reputation as one of the greats. But to Widmark, that same fire scorched everything around it. "He brings so much energy," Widmark once told a colleague, "that when the scene ends, there's nothing left standing." What disturbed Widmark wasn't Douglas's talent, it was the cost of it. Kirk demanded perfection from everyone, but his version of perfection meant surrendering to his rhythm. He thrived on tension, even off camera, driving his co-stars to exhaustion. Widmark, who valued calm and precision, saw it as another form of cruelty. Not the cruelty of words or violence, but of domination. To Widmark, Douglas embodied the danger of power unchecked, proof that even good men could lose themselves chasing greatness. He didn't see evil in Kirk's eyes. He saw obsession, the kind that made art feel like war. And in a town already consumed by ego, Kirk Douglas was the perfect storm. Robert Mitchum, the great slacker of Hollywood. If Kirk Douglas exhausted Richard Widmark with his fire, then Robert Mitchum drained him with his calm. In a world full of actors trying too hard, Mitchum seemed to barely try at all, and somehow that made him a legend. To audiences, his quiet detachment looked like confidence. To Widmark, it was heresy. Robert Mitchum didn't believe in preparation. He prided himself on it. "I just show up and read the lines," he often said, shrugging as if acting were the simplest job on earth. It infuriated Widmark. He had spent decades treating each role like a battlefield, memorizing, dissecting, and agonizing over every emotion. Mitchum, meanwhile, drifted through sets as if the work were beneath him. Yet every time the camera rolled, he was magnetic. In The Night of the Hunter, Mitchum's chilling portrayal of a preacher-turned-killer stunned Hollywood. His stillness, his slow drawl, his eerie calm. It all felt effortless. Too effortless. Widmark watched the performance in silence and later said, "He doesn't act. He just exists inside the part. It wasn't a compliment." To him, that kind of detachment wasn't art. It was surrender. Then came Cape Fear, where Mitchum embodied evil with almost terrifying ease. Without shouting, without a twitch, he created fear simply by breathing. Critics called it genius. Widmark called it dangerous. Because if greatness could come from apathy, what was left for those who believed in work? Behind the scenes, Mitchum's reputation only deepened Widmark's disdain. He was known to show up late, nap between takes, and tease directors who took the job too seriously. When someone once asked about his acting method, Mitchum replied, "I just try not to let the audience catch me acting." That line, clever to some, was blasphemy to Widmark. Acting to him was the art of effort, not the art of disguise. What disturbed Widmark most wasn't Mitchum's laziness. It was how the world celebrated it. Hollywood adored him precisely for not caring. He made indifference look elegant. He made effort look old-fashioned. He turned apathy into legend, Widmark once said bitterly. To him, Mitchum wasn't evil because he was cruel. He was evil because he made not caring seem noble. And for a man like Widmark, who lived for discipline, that was the cruelest betrayal of all. Lee Marvin, the soldier who brought war to the set. Lee Marvin wasn't just an actor. He was a survivor. Before Hollywood knew him as the hard-edged soldier with the gravel voice and thousand-yard stare, he had been a real Marine, wounded in World War II. Most men left the war behind. Marvin carried it with him. And to Richard Widmark, that was the problem. He didn't act war. He brought it back to life. Widmark first noticed Marvin's intensity during the early 1960s. On screen, Marvin radiated danger. His every movement felt unpredictable, his eyes half drunk with violence. Directors loved it. Critics called it authenticity. But Widmark saw something else, a man losing the line between performance and reality. "He doesn't play villains," Widmark once said coldly. "He brings the war back to the set." To Widmark, acting was control, emotional precision shaped by discipline. To Marvin, it was chaos, disguised as honesty. Before each take, Marvin would take a swig of whiskey, stare into the camera, and explode. Every punch, every gunshot, every yell carried the weight of a man who had truly seen death. The results were powerful but dangerous. Co-stars often walked away with real bruises, and the crew watched in uneasy silence as Marvin blurred into his characters. During The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Marvin's performance as the unpredictable outlaw was so ferocious that even veteran actors like John Wayne and James Stewart kept their distance. Widmark observed quietly from the sidelines, both impressed and disturbed. He once whispered to an assistant, "What I'm seeing isn't acting. It's a man reliving the moment that frightened him." Widmark had always believed that art should reflect pain, not relive it. He respected Marvin's rawness but hated the way it infected the set. "He made the air feel heavy," a crew member once said, "like someone had brought the battlefield into the studio." James Cagney, the noise that drowned the craft. James Cagney was the face of early Hollywood energy, loud, explosive, and unstoppable. He could turn a single line into a thunderclap and make cruelty look like charm. Audiences adored him for it. But Richard Widmark, watching from the quiet discipline of the theater world, saw something else. To him, Cagney's brilliance carried a poison, the birth of performance without restraint. Cagney dominated the 1930s and 1940s, the era of Warner Brothers gangsters and tough-talking heroes. He was the storm before Brando, the shout before the silence. Every scene he entered, he owned. His words cracked like gunfire. His movements felt choreographed chaos. Yet behind the applause, Widmark sensed a tragedy. Cagney could mesmerize an audience, he once said, but if you stood beside him, you'd want to cover your ears. While Widmark treated acting as an art of silence, the power of what isn't said, Cagney believed emotion needed to explode. He made violence theatrical, anger beautiful, and noise a kind of art. Films like The Public Enemy, 1931, and White Heat, 1949, turned him into a myth. When he screamed, "Made it, Ma!" top of the world, and blew himself sky high, audiences cheered. Critics called it genius. Widmark called it noise. "Evil doesn't need to shout," he once said. "It only needs to look at you and smile." For Widmark, Cagney represented a turning point, when cinema stopped whispering truth and started performing it. The subtleties of human emotion were being replaced by spectacle. "He made cruelty look graceful," Widmark muttered after watching The Public Enemy. "He turned ugliness into a show." They never worked together, yet Widmark spoke of him often, as though haunted by what Cagney symbolized. It wasn't hatred toward the man, it was mourning for what followed. After Cagney, Hollywood learned to love noise. Shouting became passion, excess became emotion. Directors chased intensity, not honesty, and the quiet moments that once defined the golden age slowly vanished. To Widmark, Cagney was not evil for what he did, but for what he unknowingly unleashed. The sound of applause that followed him marked the moment art became performance. "He was too good," Widmark once said. "So good that people forgot how to listen." For Richard Widmark, evil in Hollywood was never about villains on screen. It was about what fame could do to the soul, how indifference, arrogance, and chaos could turn art into ego. He lived through an era when actors bled for their craft, when discipline mattered more than spotlight. And as he watched his world change, he mourned not just his colleagues, but the honesty that once defined the screen. Widmark died in 2008, leaving behind more than 70 films, and a warning that still echoes today. When actors forget why they began, cinema loses its truth. What about you? Do you think today's stars still honor the craft the way Richard Widmark did? Or has Hollywood truly lost its soul? Tell us your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more stories that uncover the real faces behind the golden lights of Hollywood.